We're going to talk a bit about teams, which is a the other thing is about asking questions. I was, being a strong introvert when I was a student, I was nervous always to ask questions. It basically was, hey, they'll think I'm a fool if I ask this question. Then a teacher once said to me, it's better be a fool for 5 seconds than the rest of your life. So I started asking questions, and never cease to be amazed. People come up to you and say, oh, thank goodness, Bill, you asked that question, because I wanted to ask it but didn't feel comfortable to ask it. And there's no such thing as a stupid question, there's only sort of a stupid answer, and so forth. So never be frightened to ask questions, and so because that's the way you learn. And if the responder doesn't respond politely, that's his or her problem, not your problem, and so forth. So, right, well, we'll start walking through some of the team stuff. Okay, we're going to definitions, a bit of background. Most teams fail. 70% of all teams fail. And we'll talk why that way. Importance criteria in team, which is linked to why teams fail. The 4 stages in team development. This is all in your notes, and I'm just pulling out the important bits. Comparison with sporting teams. How do you bring a team in from outside? Multicultural teams, how do you handle that? Also, virtuoso teams. That's a team of people you normally keep who've got big egos. And normally, and traditionally, you don't think of them as good team players. But there is a way of putting them into teams. Team rating forms, characteristics of high-performance team. Then there's a team charter you develop, which is not a bad concept, so you have a charter. And then if we've got time, we'll look at some techniques, how you look at teams, etc. So that's what we're planning to go through. So teams, and you heard this, I think, in the head of school speech. There's no I in teams. And that's a very important thing. One of the reasons why teams got going, because with the development of the computer chip, you didn't need those layers of management. All of a sudden, you're cutting layers out in the 1990s, and it meant all of a sudden you had one person, instead of having 4 or 5 reports, had 30 or 40 people. So they actually sort of formed teams to handle that situation. So it's very much linked, the popularity of teams, with the development of the computer chip. So you have a range of teams. There's not one thing. A multi-skilled team, self-managed, self-led, and virtual teams, and so forth. In other words, the bottom one is where you have people in different geographical locations. And you have teams working in Sydney, London, and even, say, Suva, but they're all in different geographical locations. So there's different types of teams, and you have to understand that. There's not just one type. Problem solving. On this axis here, you have the percentage of problems solved. That's how problems are observed, mostly by workers and a little bit by management. But traditionally, the responsibility has been the managers fix it, not the workers. But when you get to a smart organisation, the teams fix the problems, okay? And observe the problems. All that says there, when teams work well, they are very, very powerful. Okay, there's just some statistics there, which from Honeywell, from Bell Company, and again Bell Company, huge savings, huge benefits if you get it right. So teams, when you work well, get them right, are fantastic. But they are very hard to manage, much different to managing you as individuals. Very different, and we'll talk a bit about that, and you have to understand that. So none of us are as smart as all of us, and there's some statistics that show that decision-making, problem-solving, etc., teams do better than individuals. They're quite powerful statistics there. Okay, why do you think teams fail? Any ideas of why teams fail? You've had some glucose, you've had some water, so your brain should be recovered from the previous. Yes? No clear. Yes, that can be one. Yes.
Individualism.
Sorry.
Individualism.
Individualism. People. Yes, that's another one. People too. I aren't thinking of a team concept. Somebody a comment from this table. Difference of opinions. Yeah, but that's also part of the important part of the team thing. You have a variety of opinions in there.
No teamwork.
No teamwork. Yes, not working as a team. Working, like I said down here, as individuals. Working as a group, and we'll talk a bit about later, difference between a group and a team. A lot of teams are not teams, they are groups.
Conflicts are not resolved.
Conflicts not resolved, yes. No, maybe you don't have procedures or right leadership to handle that, yes. Any other thoughts? Sorry?
Having only one idea.
One idea. Okay.
Basically only one person.
Oh, wait, yeah. Deferring to one person all the time, yep. There's one person dominating.
Lack of finance.
Lack of finance, lack of resources, yes, that's an important one. Yep. Not getting a consensus. Yep. Yep. Any other thoughts? So you can see there the teams are not easy. A lot of things can go wrong. Okay, so they're the main reasons why most teams fail. And we're going to go through the criteria which will expand more on those terms. There are other reasons, don't get me, etc., but they're the main reasons. So the important criteria, if I'm with a group who say we want to go to teams, I say, well, how do you reward people? And they say, Bill, that's a silly bloody question on individual performance. Well, you've got a problem with your teams, haven't you? If there's no reward recognition system that recognises the team's performance, people won't be interested. So how you reward, what gets measured gets done. So if you are going to teams, you have to have appropriate reward system that rewards the performance of the team. The second one is attitude. If you or I are in the same team and you have a problem, I say, bad luck, that's your problem, not my problem. That's not the attitude. If we're in a team together, his problem or her problem is my problem. So that's important attitude to have, and so forth. And the performance of the team is more important than the performance of the individual. In other words, you're quite willing to take a step back individually for the benefit of the team. And again, that's linked with attitude. Shared goal, which was one was mentioned. You have to know where you're going. Skill sets required, all sorts. They're the two main ones that are generally missing from a team: enablers and facilitators. That's what you need. Those type of people in there to help things go the right way. Now, a team should be less than 10 people. If you get above 10 people, it's too hard to control, and subgroups are too easy to form. So you're in a team that's more than 10, you'll find the dynamics very different to a team of around 7 or 8. Okay, and a lot of teams are not teams, they're groups, which we'll come to a bit later. Anybody got any questions on those criteria? Think of any others? Well, that's somebody ringing in to tell us another idea, is it? Okay. Right. Okay, so, and teams go through a stage. Don't think of the storming Norman. That whole approach has been criticised as being too male orientated, too Western white orientated, right? This is a much better framework. So you have your first stage, which is orientation, and that's like two dogs meeting for the first time. A lot of excitement. This is something new, this is something different, the tails are wagging, a sniffing is going on. So that's the first stage, right? But then all of a sudden you go into dissatisfaction stage. That's when most teams give it. It's all getting a bit too hard, the personality clashes start occurring, the differences start coming up to the fore, and people get a bit disillusioned. So that's a bit like the honeymoon's over, and now you're into sort of real life. So realise that but you need to go through that stage, and that's unfortunately where most teams, this is too hard, let's give up. So you've got to find a way. Then your resolution stage, and then your production stage. And so realise that you'll go through those 4 stages. And also they tend to happen a bit when you bring new people into a team or change people because you're changing the dynamics. So keep an eye on that one. Okay, now a lot of comparison with sporting teams. We say, well, let's learn from sporting teams. So there are some similarities there you can see with sporting teams. You want to outperform your competitors. Each player is committed to his or her role. You know, if you're playing soccer or rugby, you have a certain role to play, and you all benefit from the team's performance. And there's much practice and much training. So there's a lot to learn around motivation and so on from sporting teams, successful ones, how they motivate each other and their training and so on. So you can learn a bit, but you've got to be careful because there are some differences. In a sporting team, you know what's going on. The feedback's immediate. You know what the score is. And there's a winner and loser every week. So you can still be number 2 in your industry and still be doing well. And you might know your results every week. It might be every month you know your results, or even longer than that. So there are some areas you need to be careful of. And I say there's only one winner in a sporting team, but you can be number 2 or 3 in the industry and still be doing well. And sporting teams spend a lot of time practicing for their performance, and generally most are volunteers until you get to the elite level. So teams from outside, if you're trying to bring a team of people in from outside, it's pretty hard to do because usually they'll have a different culture than you have inside. So that's an area, but there is and I've spelled it out in more detail in the information you got there about courtship is getting to understand them. You integrate the leadership, then you integrate the operations, and then you have a full cultural integration. So it's a series of steps, and in the notes a lot more detail about how to do that one if you're bringing in, say, a team from outside into your organisation. But it's a lot of areas that can go wrong because of the different cultures. Okay, multicultural teams, huge advantage is the diversity. People have different experiences, different opinions. Huge advantage of getting multinational people in a team. But there are also potential problem areas about the different cultural attitudes to direct and indirect communications. Western is a lot more direct. The Asians, and I think the same with the people in the Pacific Islands, are much more indirect. A Westerner will be more blunt to you, while you will be a bit more subtle in your approach if you disagree and so forth. But that again, that's being stereotypical and using averages. You can still find some... in Australia, if you want to tell somebody bad news, you don't normally tell it yourself, you tell it to a friend so that friend can tell it to them, and so forth. So it's... and trouble with accents and language fluency, quite often you assume the person who's got the best language fluency is the leader, and quite often in a multicultural team, that's not necessarily the case. The person who's the real leader, informally, maybe their English is not very good. So you assume that the one who speaks best is the leader. So you can be caught out on that. Differing attitudes to hierarchy and authority. The West has less respect for authority. A lot of the Pacific areas in Asia have a much higher respect for authority, etc. I've forgotten the term you use when you... Well, the extreme case of that was a Korean airline where the captain was wrong in his decision. The second pilot knew he was wrong, but because he was the captain, didn't correct it, and the plane flew into the hill. So, you've got to be careful of how far you draw those things. But you have a lot more respect for if a chief or a senior person speaks, you probably do it. It's my wife's Thai, and the King of Thailand says something like people should grow rice there, even though there's no way that land can support rice, they'll still do it because the king has said they should do it. So different attitudes there. Also, how do you handle conflicts and so forth? So, and these again spelt out in more detail in your notes. And you have different cultural groups in your areas. Australia now has 140 different ethnic groups. And if you throw in the 250 odd different indigenous groups, there's quite a different cultural mix, and everyone tends to think of Australians as white Anglo-Saxons and so forth. And that's changed drastically over the last 30 or 40 years, etc. But you really can have a lot of fun and a lot of benefits by getting different people from different cultures into teams and learn from their experiences. Now this is one interesting. Normally you don't put star performers in a team, especially star performers who have big egos. And there's been some classical cases, and one was the development of the atomic bomb in America, where you had these huge scientists all with big egos, and they had to get together to build the atomic bomb. And normally you keep those people out of teams. So this is a way of looking at teams very differently, where you have people who are very talented, but at the same time they've got pretty self-opinionated of their own views and hard to manage. Also, the Ford company employed a lot of whiz kids, of which one was McNamara, who ended up being Defence Secretary in Kennedy's time, etc. And the development of West Side Story, the musical, they got a lot of very talented individuals to develop that, what would you call it, it was song and dance type thing, okay? So how do you handle these star performers, the highly talented people with big egos? Because they have great ideas and you want to tap into them, but hang on a minute, they're not team players. They're normally very individualist. So these are some of the things you've got to handle. Their professional reputation dominates. They're more worried about what their professionals think of them than they are of the organisation. They're more worried about what their peers in their profession think of them rather than what their organisation is. They are more about into one-upmanship. They're more about competition rather than cooperation. So all these things go against what you regard as what's required in a team. They don't share knowledge. Knowledge is the power syndrome. If I've got knowledge, I've got power. Keep it to yourself. The perfectionists, they're in their own field. They want to get it 100%. They don't like rules and regulations. They think that restrains them. They love breaking them or throwing them out. They actually don't like non-technical people and skills. They tend to trivialise them and say that those people aren't as good as me. And they're oversensitive to their expertise. They hate reviews and anybody has negative criticism. So all those things you think would work against a team. And in a traditional sense it does. But this is thinking a bit differently. But there are ways which are spelt out in the handout, but if you give them strict, rigid goals and deadlines to meet things, and it's up to them how they do it. They'll have incredible arguments and abuse to each other, etc. But that's part of the process. You let that go, you just say, there's the deadline, you fellas work it out. You've got to allow the intellectual creative freedom. You've got to encourage a bit of chaos, pandemonium, and you find ways of establishing respect for each other. And the last one's important. You've got to make them realise they're contributing something to something very big and very important. And if you can get them onto that thing, that'll unify them. So that's an interesting way, because that's of thinking very differently about teams and putting people who you normally would not put in teams because they're not regarded as the traditional team players. And so the notes have a bit more on that for you to look at. The virtual team, a group of people working together on a project that is different geographic locations. What are the challenges? Lack of face-to-face, tactile, visual contact. That's all important in communications. Communications at the maximum is only words about 20%. The rest is body language and tone. I'm not angry. My words say I'm not angry, but my tone says I'm very angry, and the way I'm standing says I'm really angry. So, and you can't see that if you don't have the face-to-face discussions. And that's why body language is such an important thing to be able to read and having that visual contact. All communications is generally via the internet, whether it's Skype, social media, etc., because you're in different locations. You have time and distance issues, like when we're doing that conference for Las Vegas, and we had the 4 people in different parts of the world. Some mornings I was in pyjamas, and other mornings other people in pyjamas, depending on what times we agreed to link up. Luckily we didn't have the video on, because I think we would have seen each other a bit differently. Understanding and respecting differences, the cultural differences and languages differences. And you have insufficient time to build up relationships, and this is important, again, with the face-to-face. You need to sit down with people and eyeball each other and have those social chit-chats to get a feel for what you're interested in, what are your hobbies, what are your passions, etc. All that's important in developing the right relationships. Yes?
Just a question. It's a general question, basically,
Yes.
for everyone's discussion, if need be. Does someone's appearance or look have an influence decision-making of a group, of a team?
Does somebody...
Somebody's appearance or is good
Yes,
looking, is a
yeah.
model from someone.
Yeah. A person...
Does that have a strong influence
Yep.
in decision-making?
A person walking through the door, you look at them and in about 2 seconds you evaluate who you think they are, and therefore your appearance is important. If you walk, if you walk into a group of creative people and you're in a suit and tie, most of them will be turned off just seeing you in a suit and tie. But if you're in a very formal situation and you walk in with dirty jeans, unshaven face, etc., that'll have the effect. If you, when you're presenting, you always should dress about one level above the audience as a thing. But yeah, no, appearance is important, unfortunately. And what happens is that person walks through the door, then you look for things that will support that opinion of them. You just don't start looking for things that are different. And that's the way the mind works. And so forth. Yeah, so appearance is important, yeah.
So if the model is sitting as part of a group of men, so obviously whatever the model is,
Yeah.
those guys will follow.
Yeah. Yeah. But beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I'm sharing a house with an Asian, a Chinese professor. And when it came to selecting who was going to win the Miss Hibiscus thing, which lady, I used Western criteria and he used Chinese criteria. We had two different people we thought were going to win it, and we were both wrong anyway. Just judges had another idea. But again, it was a cultural difference of what, so in the eye of the beholder. But so appearances, yeah, are important. If you want to create an impression, if you're going for a job interview and it's a very formal organisation, you've really got to dress formally. I even have consultants who come with me, and some parts of Queensland are very conservative. And I tell the girls, don't wear skirts, wear slacks. And I say, why? I say, well, if you want to turn the people off, you come in a skirt because they're very conservative people. You have to dress appropriately. Your choice, but I mean, just realise that all those things add up. Yeah. Sorry?
First expression is always the right person.
Well, the first impression is the one that lasts. Whether it's the right one's another thing. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, virtual teams are successful, and these are the same sort of key types of things in a normal team. When you share information, encourage proactive engagement, collaboration, well organised, people have good social skills and shared focus, strong effective leadership, encouraging the feedback, members are willing to help each other. You have quite a good technique here of kiss, kiss, kick. In Australia we say praise twice and then criticise. You're going to say criticise somebody, praise them twice before you bring up the criticism. Because if you just bring up the criticism, they'll probably get angry. But if you say, look, you're great in this, and this person's a good person, he knows what he's talking about, he's saying I'm great, because the second thing you say they're great, they're really listening, then you say, but there's something out of character, and come in with the issue. And quite often that's a good way. Now, I gather the people in your LA, in Lambasa, told me that was the kiss, kiss, kick approach. I have great fun when I go back to Australia, because when I go to Lambasa, I stay at the North Pole, and they say, how was your trip? I said, I stayed at the North Pole. They said, we thought you were going to Fiji. And I said, I stayed at the North Pole. Okay. Team, we're going to look at this, but this is an idea of once a team's going, how to rank on communication, anticipation, decision-making, conflict, leadership, goals, roles, group norms, problem-solving, and we've got a couple of tools which we'll get to in a moment. But they're the type of things you look for in a team, how you're going on those things.